Welcome to Outside Views. Today we are tackling a topic that combines high hopes, political chaos, and the enduring challenges of Brexit, the German-British Cooperation Treaty. This was meant to be a groundbreaking agreement, a symbol of renewed and strengthened relationship between Berlin and London after years of Brexit-induced tension. But now, those hopes have been dashed, at least for the foreseeable future. The collapse of Germany's so-called traffic light coalition, an alliance between the Social Democrats, the Greens and the Liberals, has thrown the future of this treaty into jeopardy. That what was once a promising attempt to rebuild trust and forge new partnerships has been reduced to yet another casualty of political instability. And this is more than a story about just one treaty. It's about how fragile diplomacy can be, especially when domestic politics intervene. And for those of us who believe Brexit was a monumental mistake, it's a reminder of how much more difficult it has become for the UK to build meaningful relationship with its European neighbours. It's a tale of unfulfilled ambitions, shifting alliances, and the lingering shadow of Brexit. So let's start with the origins of this treaty and why it was so significant. Back in August 24, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer travelled to Berlin for his first official meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. This meeting marked a turning point in UK-German relations. For years, the relationship had been overshadowed by Brexit and the often combative approach of British Conservative governments. Starmer's visit symbolized a reset here, a change to move beyond the bitterness of the past and focus on building a more constructive future. And during this meeting, Starmer and Scholz announced their intention to negotiate a comprehensive bilateral treaty. Not on trade. For those that still don't understand, it's not possible to do it on trade. The goal was to create a framework for sustained cooperation between the UK and Germany, one that would go beyond symbolic gestures and have a tangible impact on both nations. The treaty was envisioned as a first of its kind between Berlin and London, and it aimed to institutionalize regular dialogue between the two governments, promote cultural exchange, and deepen the security cooperation. But where did the inspiration for such a treaty come from? The German-British agreement drew heavily from two key precedents in European diplomacy: the Treaty of Aachen and the Lancaster House Agreement. The Treaty of Aachen, signed in 2019 between Germany and France, deepened Franco-German relations with measures such as joint parliamentary assemblies, shared defense commitments, and closer economic collaboration in their case. And this treaty was seen as a model for how two nations could institutionalize their cooperation in ways that benefit both their citizens and the broader European project. The Lancaster House Agreement, signed in 2010 between France and the UK, focused on defense and security. It was narrower in scope than the Treaty of Aachen, but still represented a significant commitment to collaboration in critical areas. The German-British treaty sought to carve its own unique path. It aimed to surpass Lancaster House Agreement in scope, while not fully replicating the depth of the Aachen Treaty, because that is only possible with another EU member. The proposed agreement included regular parliamentary committee meetings, youth mobility programs, cultural initiatives, and enhanced security cooperation. It also sought to address practical issues, such as making it easier for young people to live, work, and study in each other's country, a particularly pressing issue in the post-Brexit era. Negotiations proceeded at an impressive pace. In international diplomacy, comprehensive agreements like this often take years to finalize. Yet by October 24, the German-British treaty was on track to be signed as early as January 2025, and this rapid progress reflected the urgency and importance both sides attached to the agreement. For Starmer, the treaty was a cornerstone of his foreign policy agenda. It was a way to demonstrate that the UK could still play a vital role in Europe even outside the EU. And for Scholz, it was part of a broader vision to strengthen Germany's leadership role in Europe while deepening bilateral ties with key partners on the outside. But then came the collapse of the Germany's traffic light coalition. Internal disagreements over policy priorities and power struggles led to the implosion of the coalition government in late October. And this forced Scholz to call for early federal elections scheduled for February 2025, effectively ending the current legislative period. And in Germany, there's a principle of legislative discontinuity. And this means that any agreements or initiatives not finalized before the end of a legislative term are effectively scrapped. And this principle has left the German-British Treaty in limbo. All the progress made during months of negotiations now hangs in the balance. The treaty's fate will depend on the outcome of Germany's, so our upcoming elections here. Polls suggest that Scholz' SPD, the Social Democrats, is trailing far behind the CDU, the Conservatives, making it unlikely that Scholz will remain Chancellor. If Friedrich Merz and the CDU come to power, the treaty could be revived, but likely with significant changes to its scope and priorities. The CDU's foreign policy spokesperson Jürgen Hart has criticized Scholz's handling of the negotiations, calling his government a failure. And Hart has emphasized the importance of German-British relations, but has stopped short of committing to the treaty in its current form. And for Keir Starmer, this is a significant setback. The treaty was intended to be a key element of a strategy to rebuild the UK's relationships with European nations. And without it, Starmer's vision of a stronger European axis between Berlin, Paris and London becomes much harder to achieve. And let's not forget the broader context. The German-British Treaty was not just a bilateral agreement. It was a symbol of hope for closer European cooperation after years of Brexit-related division. Its delay highlights the fragility of international agreements and the impact of domestic politics on global partnerships. And meanwhile, Starmer is also pursuing a separate comprehensive agreement with the EU. And this EU agreement, there will not be a separate agreement, I know this, but he wants more on trade, migration, youth mobility. That's not what he wants, but we have the Brexit barriers and we have the TCA. And so negotiating here that there will not be a new treaty. There might be some small fixes on the TCA and there might be some additional small agreements like a youth mobility scheme. But at least we have the defense cooperation agreement with Germany. And this shows that even with the treaty on hold, there's still momentum for collaboration. But will this momentum survive the political upheaval in Berlin? The answer to that question will likely depend on the results of the February elections and the priorities of its next government. And I am quite sure they are on a different direction. But as we reflect on the story, it's worth considering what it tells us about the state of European diplomacy. The German-British Treaty was an ambitious attempt to rebuild trust and cooperation here. But it's still only something with a third country and with limited bilateral scope. Because, as I said in the beginning, or I mixed it in the meantime, it is not possible for Britain to make individual trade deals with EU countries. I saw it in the comments again yesterday that some people mentioned that. I thought I've said that often enough. The trade agreements are made by the EU as a whole. That was the decision, the sovereign decision of the members of the European Union. So the individual states cannot conclude any bilateral trade agreements. But that is not some dictate of the EU, as we always hear from some people. This was the decision of the member states to put that in the hands of the EU and not continue to do that. That's why the EU has more power in those negotiations, and that was a wise move. It's always hard to balance, of course, all the needs of all the member states if they make a comprehensive agreement as the EU. But it's still, in the end, always better than what each individual country could get because of the negotiating power of the whole union. But it also means, and you can write it in the comments as often as you want, and I'm still just shaking my head, there will not be bilateral trade agreements between the UK and any EU member state. And if you still haven't understood that, I don't know what's going on. Nevertheless, there are some areas where there can be bilateral agreements, like on defense and security, but those are not any repair of Brexit. They can repair trust in some places, as I said, because to see if on these agreements the British government will stick to it. We've seen what the British governments have done in recent years with agreements they concluded with other countries and with the EU. So that can build some trust, but it will never replace anything that was lost by Brexit. Nevertheless, if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen.